"Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." That's what he told her. A black woman in her 60s dressed in a pearl blouse and grace. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't look at her ticket. He just saw her and decided she didn't belong in that seat. What he didn't know was that she owned the company. And 5 minutes later, the entire staff who touched that moment, gone. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when a woman reclaims the seat that was already hers and redesigns the whole room. Where are you listening from? Let me know in the comments, and if this story grips you, be sure to hit that subscribe button, because this is just the beginning. Now let me tell you what really happened. The lounge had been designed to make people feel important. Low golden lighting, whispered jazz from the hidden speakers, velvet chairs so deep you had to climb out of them, lemon water that was always cold, smiles that felt like satin gloves. But not for her. Not this morning, when Ruth Deveraux walked through the glass doors of the executive lounge at the Elmore Grand Hotel, carrying nothing but a slim black clutch and a letter on linen paper. The smiles vanished, one by one. She was dressed simple, elegant, cream-colored blouse, navy blazer, charcoal gray slacks with a single crease down each leg, pearl earrings. Her hair was silver and pulled back into a low chignon. Her shoes whispered against the marble, but her skin was unmistakably dark, and to some people in that room that was louder than the sound of her heels. A young receptionist, white, early 30s, red lipstick too bold for this hour, glanced up and smiled tightly. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, stepping around the counter like she was about to gently remove a stray dog from a garden. "Can I help you?" Ruth handed her the envelope, thick, black with gold foil embossing. Inside a card with her name, full name, in calligraphy. Ruth Ann Deveraux, founder, Deveraux Equity Group. "Invitation to the Founders Circle breakfast," Ruth said calmly. Her voice was like velvet with an iron lining. The receptionist didn't read it. She just glanced down, blinked once, then forced another smile. "I'm so sorry, this section is for our invited VIP guests. You may want to check the main dining area downstairs." "I just did," Ruth said, still gentle. "They sent me up here." "Well, I'm sure they were mistaken," the woman replied, and for a second, just a second, her smile dropped. She was no longer trying to help. She was correcting. Behind Ruth, two bellmen stood still like statues. A woman in a silk dress looked up from her tablet, narrowed her eyes, then returned to her reading. Just then the elevator behind Ruth opened with a soft ding. A man stepped out, white, salt and pepper hair, fitted navy suit, gleaming cufflinks. He was younger than Ruth, but not by much. He moved like he was used to walking into rooms that belonged to him. "Mr. Barrington," the receptionist brightened. "We have your seat ready. Right this way." She didn't check his name. She didn't ask for an invitation. She didn't look at him twice. Ruth stood still, watching as the receptionist led him to the same armchair by the window that the invitation had described for her. The prime seat. "Ma'am," the receptionist said without turning, "you're welcome to wait in the lobby downstairs." There it was. Soft, polite, and unmistakably cruel. The room wasn't full. It wasn't about space. It was about face. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She just looked the receptionist in the eye. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The young woman blinked. "Excuse me?" Ruth stepped slightly to the side. And for the first time, a few guests got a clearer look at her face, her posture, her calmness, like a woman not used to being told no, like a woman who had heard this before many times and survived every single one. "I said," Ruth repeated, her voice even softer now, "are you sure you want to turn away a guest without reading their name?" I believe the list is complete," the woman stammered. Ruth gave a faint smile. A few feet away, a black woman behind the concierge desk looked up. Her name tag read Louise. She'd been working here for 16 years. She'd seen this play out too many times. She met Ruth's eyes, just for a moment, and looked away. The air in the room grew thinner. Ruth turned, walked over to the far wall, and sat down in the only seat not upholstered in velvet, a plain chair near the potted fig tree. She crossed her legs slowly, opened her clutch, pulled out a watch, a vintage Rolex with a leather band and initials engraved on the back, R.A.D. Then she pulled out her phone. The screen glowed in her hand. She typed a single line, "The system hasn't changed. Let's proceed." Then she hit send. From across the room, Louise saw her do it. And she knew in her bones something had just shifted. Louise swallowed, then with hands that had folded thousands of napkins and typed 100,000 room charges, she reached for her own phone under the counter, swiped to camera, hit record. Just then a waiter approached Mr. Barrington with a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. He didn't even glance at Ruth, but she was looking at him, not with anger, not with envy, just with the quiet weight of knowing something he didn't, something he couldn't, at least not yet. And just as Mr. Barrington lifted his glass to sip, Ruth whispered so softly that only the leaves of the fig tree might have heard, "You didn't just take my seat, sir. You took my patience." And across the city, in a corner office on the 42nd floor of Deveraux Tower, 3 assistants received a silent notification. Code: Lunch blackout initiated. Louise Carter had always known how to disappear. Not physically. She stood out in a room, tall and full-figured, always with her curls pinned up just so. But socially, emotionally, in a place like this, you survived by knowing when to blend in, when to look down, when to smile, nod, and say, "Of course, sir," even when your stomach twisted. But this morning, something cracked. She was still at her post-concierge desk, cornered by the service elevator, but her eyes kept drifting to that woman, the one in the gray slacks, cream blouse, and pearls that weren't loud, just deliberate. Ruth Ann Deveraux. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't moved an inch since being told she didn't belong. She didn't need to. Louise hadn't planned to record. Her hands moved before her brain did. Just reflex, the way someone might throw their body in front of a child when a car swerves. But now the video was sitting in her phone, 17 seconds long. No filter, no voiceover, just that moment, that tone in the receptionist voice, that seat being handed to a man who'd barely said hello. Louise's finger hovered over the screen. Save or delete? She didn't do either. Instead, she locked her phone, slipped it back under the counter, and looked across the room again. Ruth hadn't budged, still sitting by the fig tree, still sipping water, still watching. The glass door slid open again with a soft hiss. Kyle Bannister had arrived. He was only 39, but he made sure everyone knew he was senior operations manager for the entire East Coast region of Wellridge Hotels. Tailored charcoal suit, hair slicked to perfection, cologne expensive enough to smell like nothing at all. He walked with purpose, not power, performance. His eyes scanned the room once, briefly, then stopped at Ruth. He hesitated just half a beat, just enough for Louise to notice. Then he turned to the receptionist. "Everything running smooth?" The young woman nodded quickly, clearly relieved to see him. "Well, except there was a woman earlier, said she had an invite, but she didn't match the list." Kyle followed her gaze. His lips barely twitched, but Louise saw it. The smile that wasn't. He walked over to the center of the lounge, stopping by a server who had just cleared an empty table. "Can you please ask that guest near the ficus to return to the main lobby?" Kyle said quietly. The server blinked. "She said she..." "Just let her know this section is reserved," politely. Ruth was sipping her water, her eyes distant. The server approached slowly, tray against his chest like a shield. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, soft. "Would you mind She looked up. He froze. Her eyes weren't angry, not even sharp, just knowing. "If your manager has something to say to me," she said smoothly, "he's welcome to walk the distance himself." The server didn't move, just nodded and backed away like someone exiting a courtroom. Kyle adjusted his lapel, then walked forward. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, all confidence and courtesy. "I believe there's been a small mix-up." Ruth didn't answer. "I understand you may have received an invitation, likely a clerical error. This section is reserved for Founders Circle attendees only. I'm happy to offer you a complimentary breakfast downstairs while we—" Stop. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't blink. "You should check your system, Mr. Bannister," she said, eyes never leaving his, "before your system checks you." Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it again. Louise from across the room felt her breath catch. For a moment, Kyle looked like a man who'd stepped on a patch of ice but hadn't fallen yet. He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth twitching in an almost smile. "I'll double-check with my team," he said. She didn't respond. He turned and walked, just a little too fast, toward the back hallway. Louise's fingers were trembling again. It wasn't just what Ruth had said. It was the way she said it. Like someone who didn't guess. Like someone who knew. Louise pulled up the hotel system on her monitor, checked the guest registry. Ruth Deveraux wasn't on the room list, but then again, Founders Circle guests didn't always check in like regular guests. She opened her inbox. A new email sat at the top, time-stamped 2 minutes ago. Subject, flagged guest, do not reassign. There was no explanation, no sender signature, just that line, in red. Louise stared at it, then looked up, just in time to see Ruth's phone light up on the side table beside her. The screen flashed briefly. Phase 2 active. Ruth didn't even look at the screen. She just picked up her glass again, sipped, and stared calmly out the window. But something had changed. The room felt warmer, the air heavier. And Louise Carter, who had learned long ago how to disappear, now realized she was watching the beginning of something. And for once, she wasn't going to look away. Kyle Bannister closed the office door harder than he meant to. He walked straight to the desktop terminal, yanked the chair back, and typed fast. Eyes sharp, jaw tight. Guest registry. Executive lounge access list. Cross-check invitation codes. Nothing. No Ruth Deveraux. No RAD initials. No female guests seated in Ficus corner. Nothing but a blank line and a growing pressure behind his eyes. He leaned back, exhaled slowly, then hit the intercom. "Front desk," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. "Hey, this is Kyle upstairs. I've got an unidentified woman in the Founders Lounge. Claims she was invited. Gray slacks, maybe mid-60s. There was a pause. Then, "Oh, yeah, we thought she was with the Founders delegation from New York. I mean, she had the envelope." Kyle stiffened. "There's no one from New York scheduled today." Another pause. The woman on the other end sounded less sure now. "Well, the envelope looked real." Kyle didn't answer. He'd just hung up. Then stared at the screen. Something didn't add up. 8 floors above, the hallway outside room 802 was unusually still. A man in a navy blue suit stepped out of the service elevator, holding nothing but a phone and a slim leather folder. His badge read Operations, Strategic Liaison, which meant nothing to most people, but to those who worked inside the upper echelons of the Wellridge Group, it meant cleanup crew. He tapped his phone. A message popped up. Code Lunge Blackout. Status active. Target Deveraux. Ukes. Authority full. He smiled slightly, then spoke into the phone without dialing. "She's on site. Yes. Everything's in motion. Tell her she has full clearance. And send confirmation to the gatekeeper. Room 802 is on standby." Then he walked away, not toward the elevator, but down the hallway, toward an unmarked stairwell. Back in the lounge, Kyle was pacing now, his phone pressed tight to his ear, his voice lowered to a strained whisper. I'm telling you, she's not in the registry. I checked the whole week. The only black guest on file is someone named... Wait. Never mind, she checked out yesterday. He glanced through the tinted window toward Ruth. Still sitting, still sipping water, still entirely unbothered. Louise stood behind the concierge counter, pretending to tidy brochures, but her ears were tuned like a radio. She's not on any official list, Kyle hissed into the phone. No suite assigned, no charges, no access pass logged. There was a pause, then Kyle pulled the phone slightly away from his ear. He was clearly being scolded. Then a second call came in from a private hotel extension. Line restricted ID. He looked at it for a beat, confused, then answered, This is Kyle, Wellridge Lounge. A voice, deep, even, and anonymous, responded, Do not approach the woman in seat ficus again. Kyle blinked. Excuse me? We are watching. Do not move her. Do not speak to her. This is not your jurisdiction anymore. Click. The line went dead. Kyle didn't move, didn't blink. Louise saw it all. Elsewhere in the lounge, Ruth's phone buzzed. She didn't look surprised. She answered with a soft, yes, then listened. Her voice was nearly a whisper, but Lay's leaning ever so slightly forward caught part of it. Yes, I'm aware. Let her fumble. I'll meet you in room 802 once the temperature shifts. She ended the call, looked up toward the window. Then, for the first time in 40 minutes, she stood. She moved like someone who hadn't been waiting, just choosing when to act. She walked slowly across the room, her heels gentle against the floor, until she reached the concierge desk. Louise felt her breath catch. Ruth stopped, turned slightly, and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need to explain itself. I believe, Ruth said quietly, it's time for a little fresh air upstairs. Then she walked toward the private elevator, the one only executives used, and disappeared inside. As the doors closed behind her, Louise's phone buzzed. A text, no name, no contact, just one line. Whatever you do, keep the video. She'll know what to do with it. Louise looked up at the now empty fig tree seat, then down at her phone, then toward the hallway where Kyle still stood frozen, phone in hand. And for the first time all morning she whispered under her breath, Lord have mercy, who is she? Room 802 wasn't on the guest directory. There was no placard on the door, no do not disturb, no minibar, just a matte black hallway, a sliding panel, and a single lock that blinked once, green, when Ruth approached. Inside, the room was cold and quiet. A large glass conference table sat beneath recessed lights, surrounded by soundproof walls. No windows, no distractions. A single wall-mount screen glowed in standby. A man was already waiting, standing near the control panel in a charcoal suit. Younger than Ruth by decades, but he didn't greet her like a superior. He greeted her like someone in the presence of a storm. Deveraux, he said softly, we've activated Tier 2 clearance, dashboards are ready. Ruth removed her blazer and draped it over the back of a chair. Then she unfastened her vintage Rolex, set it gently on the glass, and checked the time. We have 19 minutes, she said, no more. The assistant, Samuel, nodded and tapped the touchscreen. The wall came to life. Rows of data scrolled across the screen. Staff performance scores, internal complaints, security footage access logs, anonymous survey flags. At the top of the dashboard, the label, Elmore Grand, Personnel Risk Report, Shareholder Override, Deveraux Group. Ruth stepped forward, zoom in on hospitality staff over the past 12 months. The list shrank to 23 names. She scanned the screen. Pointed once, that one, Bannister Kyle. Flagged twice for tone-based discrimination, no disciplinary follow-up. Another tap. Him, she continued. Training incomplete. Last bias module skipped twice. Tap. That one, escorted a guest out last fall. Woman with a Senegalese surname, complaint dismissed internally. She didn't look angry. She looked Surgical. Samuel tapped rapidly. The staff list began blinking with yellow markers. Add them to Tier 3 observation. Push their files to investor review. Ruth folded her arms. We've funded inclusion initiatives at this hotel group for 6 years. $500,000 in diversity training. Where did that money go? Samuel didn't answer, but the look on his face said it all. Ruth turned toward the wall again. Next tab, show me incident tags by keyword. The list of terms appeared. Appearance, voice, clothing, security. Upgrade denial. She pointed to upgrade denial. Any overlaps with today's guest interactions? A blinking red alert appeared. Match found. 9:02 a.m. seating. Guest flagged. Deveraux, Ruth A. A second later, the system cross-referenced the timestamp with the guest video uploaded from internal staff Wi-Fi. Source, personal device, concierge desk. Samuel raised an eyebrow. She filmed it? Ruth didn't answer. She simply reached into her clutch and retrieved a small flash drive. Louise Carter, longtime employee. She recorded the moment of denial. I'll authorize that clip to be archived under the Foundation's learning platform. Samuel hesitated. You're uploading it? I'm institutionalizing it, Ruth said calmly. This isn't about one man getting fired. It's about making sure the culture doesn't hide under velvet anymore. She inserted the flash. The screen blinked. A thumbnail of the clip appeared. Frozen on the moment the receptionist smiled as she handed Mr. Barrington the seat. Below it, a prompt. Submit to training archive? Yes or cancel. She tapped yes. The screen updated. Video uploaded. Deveraux case 470 LG. Visibility executive only. Use required staff training module. Bias response series Q3 deployment. Samuel whispered to himself. Damn. Ruth looked at the timer on her Rolex. We're at minute 14. Next step, shareholder signal. He nodded and brought up a new interface, a corporate-level dashboard tied to voting shares and oversight systems. At the top, a warning. Shareholder input detected. Tier 1 override initiated. Origin, Deveraux Holdings. Status, active review protocol triggered. Ruth's lips barely moved, but her voice cut like glass. Let the system finish what it started. The screen blinked again. Names began shifting into a new column. Roles under immediate review 17. Risk category elevating. Audit estimated completion 72 hours. Downstairs, in the lounge, none of them knew what was coming yet, but in room 802, the future was already recalibrating itself. By the time Louise returned to the lounge, the temperature had changed. Not the thermostat, not the lighting. The mood. The once effortless smiles of the front desk had stiffened. The chatter among staff had thinned to whispers. Even the background jazz felt more like a ticking clock than a melody. Something had shifted. Louise walked slowly toward the coffee station, pretending to restock napkins, but her eyes scanned the room like a quiet observer in a courtroom. A junior manager leaned over to the receptionist and murmured, "You heard about the override?" She shook her head. "Someone from Investor Relations is watching the feed. They flagged 2 people already. I don't know who." Louise kept folding napkins, kept her breath steady. But she knew. She had seen it. The video upload, the dashboard, the name Deveraux. Most of them still thought it was just a guest with a complaint. They had no idea. At 10:26 a.m., an internal email hit 6 inboxes at once. Subject line, personnel flagged for executive review, do not forward. The message had no greeting, no explanation, just a list of employee ID numbers. Each one had a timestamp beside it. Kyle's assistant, a young woman named Ivy, opened it and frowned. She glanced across the room at Kyle, who was staring at his tablet like it was suddenly written in Latin. "Did you get this too?" she whispered. Kyle didn't respond. He was scrolling frantically, trying to access the personnel logs. The system was slower than usual. Some functions were grayed out. He reached for the phone, dialed internal operations. 3 rings, then voicemail. He tried again. Still no answer. For the first time that morning, sweat broke through the back of his collar. Across the room, a German businessman lowered his newspaper. "Excuse me," he asked the barista, "is something happening?" She hesitated, clearly unsure what to say. "Oh, no sir, just minor technical maintenance." The man nodded but didn't look convinced. A few tables away, the man now sitting in Ruth's former seat, Mr. Barrington, began to notice the stares. He shifted uncomfortably, reached for his coffee, missed. His spoon clattered on the saucer. 3 staff members flinched. Even he could tell, whatever this was, he had something to do with it. Near the coat rack, a young bellhop named Jeremy pulled out his earbuds and exhaled. He looked at the other staffer folding towels. "I'm gonna head out," Jeremy said quietly. "What?" I think I just served tea to the woman who writes our training manuals." The other staffer blinked. Jeremy shook his head. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm not sticking around to be the example." "You saw how she looked at Kyle, like she was waiting for him to finish digging his own grave," the other muttered. Jeremy gave a half smile. "Exactly." He walked toward the staff door without another word. Behind the concierge desk, Louise bent down to grab more menus and spotted something odd. The back-emmer printer was humming. It hadn't printed anything all morning. She leaned closer. 1 sheet, then 2, then 3, all with the same header. Deveraux Foundation, Training Mandate, Immediate Delivery. The final page printed slower than the rest. Status Executive Priority. The final page printed slower than the rest. At the top, bold letters, authorized by R.A. Deveraux. Louise stared. Her throat tightened, her hands trembled, but she steadied them, then slowly slid the pages into a folder and locked them in the bottom drawer. This wasn't just a guest complaint. This wasn't a social media moment. This was system correction. Ruth hadn't come here to make a scene. She'd come to rewrite the blueprint. And she had already begun. The email hit at 11:02 a.m. No subject line, no signature, just 5 lines of text, delivered to every staff inbox assigned to the executive lounge. Incoming audit confirmed. Staff meeting required, 11:30 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Failure to appear equals forfeit of position. Internal oversight, Deveraux Group. Nobody spoke for a full 20 seconds. Then someone dropped their coffee, then someone gasped. Then a voice cracked, barely louder than a whisper. "That's real, isn't it?" At the reception desk, Ivy pressed a shaky hand over her mouth. One of the servers sat down right where he was standing, on the floor beside the pastry cart. And at the towel station, a young woman with curly braids quietly pulled the lanyard from her neck, laid her employee badge on the counter and walked out. No words, just exit, like she'd already done the math. Kyle stood in the back hallway, phone to his ear, eyes wide, lips dry. "She doesn't have clearance," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "She doesn't have executive-level override. She wasn't on the list." The voice on the line said only, "Mr. Bannister, respectfully, if you're speaking about Ruth Ann Deveraux, no one in this building outranks her, not even our CEO." Click. The line went dead. Kyle dialed again, this time a different number, a lawyer in corporate risk. Or so he thought. The line picked up and then immediately forwarded to voicemail. Not his voicemail, but a generic tone that said only, "This party is no longer accepting calls." He stared at the phone, then tossed it onto a chair like it burned him. His breath came shallow, his collar damp. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He stumbled out into the lounge, no smile, no polish, and looked straight at Louise. "You," he said, hoarse. "You know what's going on, don't you?" Louise didn't flinch. She just tilted her head slightly. Calm. Even. "Yeah, she said. And if you had listened to her 5 minutes longer, you would too. Kyle's lips parted, but nothing came out. Louise looked down, folded a cloth napkin, and added, "You should sit, Kyle. Really." The elevator dinged. It wasn't loud, but it silenced the room. Every head turned, every guest, every staff member, as the steel doors slid open and Ruth stepped out. Same blouse, same slacks, same pearl studs. But something had shifted. She wasn't just walking now, she was arriving. She took one step forward, then another, heels gentle but deliberate. No one stood to greet her. No one dared. Mr. Barrington, the white man still seated in the chair she'd once been denied, tried to straighten his tie, then gave up. His coffee remained untouched. Even the barista stopped mid-pour. Ruth passed through the lounge like gravity itself had entered the room. She didn't stop, didn't glance left or right until she reached the concierge desk. Louise stood, not by instinct, but by understanding. Ruth didn't speak. She simply reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small titanium card, and set it gently on the counter. Louise glanced down. It read, R.A. Deveraux, Primary Governance, Deveraux Holdings. No flourish, no seal, just truth. Then Ruth turned and walked away. No announcement, no press release, just footsteps across a marble floor. Across the room, a junior staffer whispered, "Is that her?" Another voice answered, barely audible, "I think the largest shareholder in this company just walked past me and didn't blink." No one moved for a long time. Then the printer at the front desk buzzed again, quietly. A final document slid out bearing just 4 words, "Staff Audit in Progress." Louise didn't read it. She was still staring at the titanium card on her desk. Her heart thudded like distant thunder. Then, finally, under her breath, "Not for anyone else, just for herself," she said. The judgment didn't come loud. It came dressed in pearls. The door clicked shut behind the last chair. No windows, no air conditioning. No refreshments, just 47 chairs in a perfect ring, all facing inward like a support group with no therapist, and a single screen glowing at the front of the room. Staff Audit Session, overseen by Governance Lead R.A. Deveraux. The room wasn't large, just large enough for discomfort. Kyle sat in the third chair from the left, his knee bouncing. Next to him, Ivy gripped the hem of her skirt like a lifeline. A busser, a concierge, 2 junior managers, all seated in silence, not sure if they were about to be trained, tested, or terminated. The door opened again. Ruth stepped in. Same clothes, same posture, no file folder, no briefcase, just a small silver laptop and eyes that didn't blink much. She walked to the center of the ring, placed the laptop on a narrow table, opened it, tapped a single key, and sat. No introduction. The lights dimmed. The screen came alive. It was the clip, the one Louise had recorded, the moment Kyle denied her seat, stammered, handed the ticket to a white man, then turned back toward Ruth like she was invisible. No music, no cuts, just the moment. And then it ended. The screen went black. Silence. Then Ruth looked up. No judgment in her tone, no heat, just a question. "How many of you laughed when it happened?" No one spoke. She leaned forward. "How many of you have seen that exact situation happen before? Not to me, but to someone who looked like me." Still nothing. She sat back. That's what silence trains, not hate, not rules. Silence. Kyle stood. "I'm not comfortable with this process," he said stiffly. "Neither is gravity," Ruth replied. "And yet it pulls every one of us." Kyle bristled. Tried again. "I followed protocol. She wasn't on the list. I treated the situation the same way I would anyone." Ruth turned the laptop. Typed something. A screenshot appeared on screen. It was an email from Kyle to Ivy, timestamped 8:59 a.m. Subject, Rad Lounge entry. Deny access. She looked back up. You wrote this before you ever checked the system. Kyle opened his mouth, closed it, sat down. A man near the back raised his hand, the maintenance supervisor. I've worked here 9 years, he said, slow, and I've heard Kyle say those types don't know where they belong, especially when they're older, or dressed too confident. He didn't look at Kyle, just said it, like setting down a truth. A young woman, maybe 22, spoke next. She hadn't said a word all week. I'm an intern, she said quietly. I saw her standing there. I wanted to help, but I froze. I didn't know if I was allowed. Ruth turned to her. That's not cowardice, she said softly. That's what bad systems do to good people. They make them doubt their instincts. Then Ruth stood, no papers in hand, just a small black booklet she opened without looking down. I will now read 5 names. No one breathed. After each name, I will not explain. I will not argue. I will not condemn. These decisions are not reaction. They are rectification. She began. Kyle Bannister. Kyle looked down at his knees. Rebecca Stanton. The assistant lounge manager blinked rapidly. James Holt. The beverage coordinator sighed and nodded. Sylvia Keene. A concierge let out a low moan. And Darrell Marks. No one moved. Then Ruth continued. Your exit packages have been prepared. There is no security detail. You will not be paraded. You will not be shamed. But you will leave today, and you will reflect. Silence again. Then Ruth closed the booklet. And for the rest of you, if you're not uncomfortable right now, you're not growing. She looked across the room. Not unkind, not triumphant, just clear. Let this be the last time a woman like me has to be the one to prove she belongs in a seat she already owns. The chairs were emptier now. 5 had left the room in silence. No begging, no blow-ups, just a quiet exodus, a kind of surrender that felt oddly peaceful. No one clapped, no one cheered, but no one cried either. Kyle had been the first to go. He didn't look back. Just buttoned his jacket, tucked his tablet under one arm, and walked out, like the hallway might erase what had just happened. It didn't. Inside the audit room, a stillness settled. Not cold, not dead, just clearer. The air felt newly scrubbed. Ruth stood where she was, her back to the door. She hadn't moved since reading the last name. Then she turned, and did something no one expected. She pulled 3 chairs closer to her own and pointed to 3 people, Ivy, the young intern, and the maintenance supervisor. She didn't explain, just said, "Sit here." They did. Then she looked across the rest of the room. "Some of you are wondering why they were chosen," she said. "It's not about hierarchy or title or tenure." She glanced toward the empty chair Kyle had left behind. "It's about pause. Who paused? Who noticed? Even if they didn't act yet." No one moved. Ruth gestured to the circle. "The real table doesn't need gold legs," she said. "Just people who stop the room when something's wrong." Louise stood up. Not fast, not dramatic, just a quiet step forward, hands clasped, nerves visible. She looked at Ruth, then at the others. "I didn't know how deep this went," she said, "but I knew something wasn't right, and I stayed when it would have been easier to leave." She took a breath. "I wasn't loud, I didn't have a title, but I hit record." Ruth nodded slowly. "That's what staying in the room means." From the inner pocket of her blazer, Ruth pulled out a folded paper cream, thick like parchment. She laid it on the small table and slid it forward. On the top line in clear serif font it read, "Training Initiative, Human Systems Reimagined." Below that, handwritten in black ink, Module 1, Proximity, who we listen to, who we don't. Why? She didn't unroll a slideshow, didn't explain what to do. She just looked at them and said, "You'll be the ones implementing this." A beat. The ones who didn't flinch when the room got quiet. They looked at each other, then at her. No one said yes, But no one said no. Sometimes agreement is just the way you sit taller in your chair. Ruth gathered her laptop, tucked it under one arm, walked to the door. But before opening it, she turned back once more. Final words, soft but full. "The room is yours now, and this time," she said gently, "don't wait for someone like me to fix it." Click. The door closed, and the audit room became something else entirely. It started as a whisper, a clipped recording barely 90 seconds long, posted without a caption, no flashy transitions, no music, just a grainy video of a woman standing at the edge of a quiet conference room, saying one line, "The room is yours now. Just don't wait for someone like me." By noon, the clip had spread to forums for DEI managers, executive coaches, and internal HR channels across LinkedIn. By nightfall, it was trending on Twitter. By morning, it had made the evening news. They called it the Pearl Protocol. Some said it was another viral moment, but others heard it for what it was. A new floor being poured beneath a broken building. The headlines didn't scream scandal. They whispered shift. Black CEO walks out with dignity, returns with the system. Audit at Elmore Grand signals broader shakeup across hospitality. Deveraux Holdings quietly restructures personnel in 11 luxury properties. A business journal asked if Ruth had been planning this long before she ever stepped foot in the lounge. She hadn't, but she'd been ready. And now the system wasn't dodging the mirror anymore, it was holding it steady. 2 days later, in a closed-door session of the Wellridge Executive Board, Ruth entered without a slideshow. No laptop, no laser pointer, just a stack of simple white papers, each one bearing 3 words: proximity, policy, power. She handed one to each person at the table. No one asked what it meant. Not yet. She let the silence fill in their guesses. Then finally she spoke. "This is not a mission statement," Ruth said. "It's not a PR slogan. It's not a rebranding." She held her copy up, 2 fingers only. "This is the redesign." A woman near the end of the table, a skeptical VP with sharp glasses, asked, "And who's going to manage this?" Ruth smiled, calm. She turned toward the back of the room. There, standing just inside the door, were Louise, Ivy, and 3 others from the audit room. No suits, no rank, but they stood like architects, like people who'd already seen the blueprint. Ruth gestured toward them. "They will," a voice from across the table. One of the older financial officers grunted. "You're letting entry-level staff run systemic reform?" Ruth didn't blink. "No," she said. "I'm letting the people who've lived under your system define what the next one feels like." Silence followed, not out of agreement, out of realization. There was no arguing with felt. Back at Elmore Grand, the marble hadn't changed. The lights still glowed warm, the coffee still cost $20, but something was different. No press release, no ribbon cutting, no parade. Just a new plaque, small and brushed in bronze, placed beside the central lobby wall. No spotlight, no velvet rope, just words. "Some seats aren't given, they're reclaimed." Underneath that line, no name, just Deveraux Rebuild Initiative 2025. And beside it, in a discreet glass frame, a copy of a white paper, 3 words only: proximity, power, pact. It was just another morning, no press, no whispers, no headlines. The executive lounge at Elmore Grand had returned to what it was designed to be: quiet, polished, slow-moving. The espresso machine hummed like a warm throat clearing itself. Sunlight spilled through the high windows like it had no memory of what had happened days before. And yet, there it was. Seat 1A, still near the window, still pristine, still empty. A new staff member, maybe 19, maybe 20, was wiping it gently with a soft cloth. Like someone had told him, that one matters. He didn't know why, but he cleaned it with both hands. At exactly 9:07 a.m., the front door eased open, not dramatically, just intentionally. And Ruth stepped in. No blazer, no pearls, just a soft brown cardigan, walking shoes, and a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She didn't ask for help, didn't glance around. She simply paused at the reception, nodded at the young woman behind the desk, and said, "I have an appointment." The girl blinked. "With who, ma'am?" Ruth smiled. Small, gentle. "With that seat," she pointed. 1A. Ruth walked past the coffee counter, past the fruit bowls, past the buzzing of screens. She sat. No one stopped her. No one reassigned her. The cushion gave slightly beneath her, like it had been waiting. She reached down, slid off her shoes, crossed one leg over the other, pulled a notebook from her bag. Not leather-bound, not corporate, just a soft-covered journal with a corner folded. She opened to a fresh page and wrote. No one would read it. That wasn't the point. Near the concierge station, two new hires watched her quietly. "Do you know who she is?" one whispered. The other shrugged. "No, but the janitor said when she walks in, everybody breathes a little softer." They watched a moment longer, then turned away and left her in peace. Ruth didn't look up. She didn't need to. The lounge wasn't quieter because of silence. It was quieter because no one doubted she belonged anymore. And that silence, that sacred stillness, was the seat, not the cushion, not the wood, not the number. The pause, the recognition, the right to just sit. She smiled once more, closed the notebook, leaned her head back against the chair, and whispered to herself, soft as a breath, soft as memory, "I didn't want the seat. I wanted the pause it was supposed to earn." Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about every moment a woman was told to shrink, to wait, to not cause trouble, even when trouble was knocking at her dignity. Ruth didn't raise her voice, she raised the standards. And that, to me, is a different kind of power. The kind that walks in calm and walks out changed. If this story stirred something in you, if you saw your mother, your auntie, or maybe even yourself in Ruth, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. And if stories like this matter to you, stories that center Black women with wisdom, courage, and quiet fire, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share this video, because when we listen, we remember. And when we remember, we rise. Until next time, stay seen, stay strong, and never give up your seat again.